Welcome, everyone. I'm Charlie Shulak, partner with Horty Springer and Mattern, and I'm here with my partner, Ian Donaldson, for the Horty Springer and Mattern Health Law Expressions podcast. I had to look at my paper to make sure I got all of that correct. But the name of this podcast is The Brave New World of Ambulatory Peer Review. Now, if you know Horty Springer, you know that we do a lot of work in the medical staff, the hospital peer review process space. Ian and I are faculty members for the Peer Review Clinic, a seminar that we have 3 times a year. But we've heard a lot of interest, or we've received a lot of interest and a lot of questions about outpatient peer review or ambulatory peer review. So that's why we're having this podcast, to talk a little bit about how ambulatory peer review works, why there's an interest in ambulatory peer review, setting up your ambulatory peer review process, how it might differ a little bit from your hospital peer review process. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about some peer review considerations for outpatient peer review, information sharing with affiliated hospitals or other entities within a healthcare system. So just to go back into that question, or the thing that I mentioned during the introduction, why is there an interest in ambulatory peer review? What are you seeing?
Well, there seems to be a lot of reasons, right? I mean, some of it is just driven by the fact that things are more cost effective in an outpatient world, right? And the dollar drives a lot of this. Sometimes we've seen the argument that, hey, as a provider, you might not be able to own part of a hospital, but you can own part of a joint venture, right? So there's physician interest. I think patients want this, right? Everybody would rather go home than stay overnight in the hospital. So the long and short of it is there's tons of reasons that seem to push us in this direction, right? And all the data that we see just says this is a growing segment of the market, right? More and more care is going to be provided in this ambulatory space. What Charlie and I see, as opposed to the hospital side, right, where you've had a well-established history of peer review processes in place, is while we're doing more things in the outpatient side, we really don't know if we're doing them well, right? And I think that's a big part of what we're getting more interest in, saying, hey, we recognize we're shifting a large part of the care that we're providing into these outpatient clinics, outpatient offices, and we really don't know if there's good care being provided. And so it's really been an area that I think we're about to see spike. I know just from our day jobs, right? We've done a number of these projects in the last couple of years where I think previously all we did was hospital peer review. And Charlie mentioned we do our seminar every couple of times a year. And that's something that, we're getting more questions and feedback about during the seminar as well. Like, hey, right, we're here to learn about the hospital side, but even our attendees recognize there's a big chunk of space out there where care is also being delivered, and having some sort of oversight process seems to be the direction that we're headed at this point.
Yeah, and more and more things, that you mentioned, more and more things are being done in an ambulatory setting. I was just reading an article in the AHLA, that's the American Health Lawyers Association, their daily email. They were talking about some hospitals moving interventional cardiology procedures into ASCs, doing them on an outpatient basis, which I was pretty surprised by that. And if you're doing those things on an outpatient basis, you probably want to have an oversight process, a peer review process.
Yeah, and I guess that's a really that just jogged a point to make, right? I know we have like provider-based outpatient clinics, and those are going to be covered by what we think of as the traditional hospital medical staff peer review process. Yeah. What we're talking about here, and your example really jarred me, is this is like freestanding, right? We're moving them to ASCs, we're moving them to outpatient clinics, offices that are not covered by the scope of the traditional medical staff process. And I think, like you said, we're doing more complex things out there. We better make sure they're being done safely and appropriately. So having this push, I think, is something that we're definitely going to see. And, one of the things we've learned, and I'm sure some of you have probably, there's probably some Horty Springer acolytes out there, right? And maybe even some folks we've worked with on inpatient hospital peer review. If you're out there and you know that, or if you've just stumbled upon us for the first time, one of the things we've kind of made our hallmark is let's make sure people have good tools so that they can manage performance issues in a non-disciplinary way, right? We've found that given the right tools, physician leaders do a really great job of addressing concerns, right? Clinical concerns as they come up. And we've taken that same approach when we've done these outpatient peer review models, right? The difference is it's a little bit structurally different, right? The hospital obviously has a big medical staff with departments and really well entrenched processes, where on the outpatient side, it's been interesting, right? I mean, sometimes we might luck out and we look at the corporate bylaws that were filed and created 20 years ago, and they did anticipate some sort of committee. Sometimes we have to modify the corporate bylaws to create that committee. But the long and short of it is, we can use a lot of the same tools that we do on the hospital side. We just might need to do a little bit of manipulation to give you some structure, because it's just going to be different. And there's all sorts of variations. You mentioned ASCs, right? That's going to look different than like a primary care clinic and the triggers that they use. But where there's a will, there's a way. And we've had some pretty good success stories where we've been able to develop this kind of process on the outpatient side.
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned triggers, and of course, inpatient triggers that are specialty specific for surgery aren't going to apply on an outpatient basis. I mean, they might lend themselves well for things that are being done in ASCs, those surgery specific triggers, but something like return to surgery within a certain number of hours probably aren't going to be relevant across the whole outpatient spectrum.
Feels like you end up looking more at like metrics as opposed to quote unquote cases. And there's always going to be a little, again, variation depending on the type of entity that we're talking about. But I agree with that. It does, you do have to reorientate yourself a little bit to the space that you're in.
Yeah. No, please.
One of the other driving issues that we've seen is, the information sharing, peer review protections, right? Being able to talk to each other. And so we've found quite a bit of variation in terms of what there's 50 states out there. They all have a different peer review statute. We've seen a little bit of variation in terms of what they cover in this world, right?
Yeah, and it's going to be a lot different from, not a lot different, but there are going to be some differences from hospitals, because those peer review statutes, when they were written, were designed
for that
hospital peer review processes and hospital committees, and provide immunity and evidentiary protections for those hospital committees. Now, I'd say over the last 15 years, some states have been recognizing that more care is being provided on an outpatient basis, and more care is being provided through healthcare systems, and there's a need for sharing information. So states like Virginia and Colorado have actually revised or amended their state peer review statutes to accommodate those changes in the way that healthcare is delivered.
It's always really nice when we're in one of those states, right, where it's like a modern peer review statute that actually reflects like how medicine is delivered in this day and age, whereas other states feels like we're still riding with the rules that were written in like 1963, and they're not quite as helpful.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too critical, but sometimes you see these opinions or these state peer review statutes, and they'll say things like, well, the hospital disclosed peer review information to a group that is staffing, I don't know, the ED.
Yeah.
And they say that that's a waiver of the peer review statute, which,
right.
Again, I don't want to be too critical, but it's a little tone deaf.
It is. And it makes it difficult. I mean, and it is, as we go through this kind of work and working with our clients on these kind of, it's a big question we need to answer.
Yeah.
Like, is this going to be protected? Is it not? Are there other alternatives to protecting it?
Yeah, and that's a good point. And one of those alternatives is something called the Patient Safety and Quality Improvement Act. Now, we've been talking about state peer review statutes. That's a federal law, so it applies in all 50 states. And that's the law that created the concept of patient safety organizations and the concept of patient safety work product. And patient safety work product is just the quality information that you generate as a part of the process of submitting information and preparing information to submission to a PSO that gets the protection, the federal privilege, the federal confidentiality protections. And, in 2024, there was a great case out of the 11th Circuit. That's a federal circuit court or appellate court case, so it has a lot of influence across the country. And it was called In Re Baycare, and it was a group practice in Florida that the court was determining whether peer review information that they had generated was going to be protected under the Patient Safety and Quality Improvement Act. And the court determined that peer review information was protected. Now, I don't want to get into the weeds of that opinion because there are other opinions out there. We just were talking, Ian and I, about an opinion in Kentucky that dealt with the Patient Safety and Quality Improvement Act that was more recent, didn't cite the In Ray Baycare case, which was odd that they didn't cite it because it was a circuit court case dealing with Patient Safety and Quality Improvement Act protections. But that was a little bit harsher, a little bit of a narrower interpretation of the protections under the Patient Safety and Quality Improvement Act. But we think that outside of Kentucky, that you have a pretty good argument to protect outpatient peer review information by using a patient safety organization under the Patient Safety and Quality Improvement Act.
Yeah, for sure. And we know some of you have kind of homegrown PSOs. Some of you are plugged into kind of those third-party PSOs that are out there. However you have it set up, it definitely offers a different opportunity to get protection over the peer review process in the outpatient area.
But now that's just another level of protection. You want to start with your state peer review statute and make sure that whatever you're doing from a process standpoint is consistent with that state peer review statute. Again, we can't cover all 50 states peer review statutes in the limited time that we have with you. But that's kind of a frontline consideration when developing these policies for outpatient peer review. Now, one other thing that I wanted to mention is, when it comes to protections, you want to have a formalized process for sharing information, sharing relevant information with other entities that are within your system. So, for example, you have outpatient providers and you have this peer review process that you just developed for those outpatient providers. They're doing something in an outpatient space that touches on something that they're doing on an inpatient basis. You want to make sure that you can share any concerns that are raised that might affect the care that they're providing in a hospital within your system. And that might be through an information sharing policy. If you don't want to go through the steps of developing an information sharing policy, at least have an information sharing agreement. So have processes for sharing information from your outpatient peer review process with other relevant entities within your system.
Yeah, definitely been another big driver of this move to have that peer review protection for the outpatient side, or that process in place, because ultimately, you want to have the left hand know what the right hand knows. And we think that in many states, and again, you have to do a state by state assessment of this, but in many states, it's akin to a hospital sharing information with another hospital, right? Where we have one peer review process sharing information with another peer review process, we feel comfortable that's going to be protected. Same idea here, right? If you have your system hospitals, peer review committees talking with your outpatient peer review committees, we think there's a good argument to be made that wouldn't waive any privilege, and kind of a very, very short nutshell way to describe that. And I know when we do our peer review clinic that we do that Charlie mentioned several times a year. Charlie does a fantastic job. You have that great talk on employment where you kind of talk about information sharing and really do that deep dive analysis, because it does require that. I mean, this is an area you want to be careful. So my very rudimentary description hopefully gives you an idea based on the time we have here today.
Yeah, so that's it for what we have to say during this podcast about outpatient peer review.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an exciting topic for us. We love to talk about it. We talk about it more extensively and in more detail in our peer review clinic, which Ian just mentioned. It's our national seminar that Horty Springer and Mattern put on several times a year. So if you're interested in that, take a look at the schedule that we have on our website.
Yeah, and it's work we do. So if there's anything we can ever help with that, feel free to reach out to us as well.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, all. Take care.